Better Gaming, the event and podcast series dedicated to all aspects of ethical gambling, where we discuss how to make gambling and gaming safe, secure, and socially balanced for everyone. I'm your host, Jim, and today we're diving into a corner of the gambling landscape, which is most definitely my favorite. It's lotteries. Aside from it being my day job, the reason why I like lotteries so much is because they sit between good causes, between gambling and marketing, and how they can all combine to be a net positive for society. And with that in mind, I'm really excited to welcome today's guest, George Collins. Welcome to the show, George.
Hi, Jim. Great to be here.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on. Your insight today is going to be invaluable. And I would describe you as a triple threat when it comes to lotteries. George is the commercial director of CFP Lotteries and Raffles, one of the leading UK ELMs. He is also CEO of Navigator, which is a digital specialist agency for lottery player acquisitions. And finally, and most recently, he is the chair of the Lotteries Council. Before we tuck into the discussions today, I just want to highlight that whilst we are talking about lotteries, we will most likely start talking about products that sit alongside them. So that may be raffles, it might be scratch cards, it might be instant wins, and it will most definitely include the grey area of prize draws, which seems to be slipping itself outside of the world of regulation. There's plenty to unpack, but let's start at the beginning. George, can you just walk us through your journey into the lottery industry and what initially drew you to this unique sector?
Yeah, and I quite like that triple threat. I might try and use that in my everyday. So my route into the lottery sector is quite strange. So I come from a finance background, and that was very much around how money moves globally. And prior to that, at university, I did a graduate school. After university, I did a graduate scheme that looked at how data and physical items move around the world. So I had this interest about kind of opposite attractions, and if something happens here, something happens over there, and the kind of logistics, if you like, in between that. In just before I came into the sector in the finance stuff, this number sounds almost made up, but I was responsible with a team for £1 billion worth of foreign exchange per year, which is clearly a ridiculous number. Almost doesn't make sense. But I saw no value personally to that. So if we grew that number, or if something changed, maybe new people would be hired, but I didn't have any kind of tangible impact. And so that for me was kind of the start of looking to come into a different industry, or look for an area or a potential company that was smaller in size, so that my impact was kind of more measured. And that was basically how I came into the lottery sector. So I started working for an external lottery manager, and came in as part of a process that they were going through in terms of growth, and they'd just taken some private equity at that time, and so got involved with those guys for a couple of years. And then during that process, I kind of had this realization that creative was incredibly powerful and was a real kind of needle mover. So if you could change creative, if that creative was connected to behavioral science, or to kind of attitudes and perceptions around different products that you're putting in front of people, human beings, that could actually have an impact. And that was really, really interesting to me. I think what I would say is that when I first came in, I looked at Raffle and was kind of like, wow, is this a thing? Millions of tickets being sent across the UK. I'd seen the local tombola or the school fete, but I didn't have any kind of realization.
It's definitely got Blue Rinse vibes about it, right?
Yeah, it certainly does. Yeah, it certainly does. But I mean, how wrong could we be? And I also didn't have a massive amount of exposure to that behavioural science stuff initially. That was also really interesting to me. So when I left LM, I set up a dedicated agency that sat within another larger agency, and I was successful at getting some buy-in essentially to set up this new agency. One thing that was really clear was that, again, this kind of the power of creative, and it was at that time that I got into discussion with another supplier to the charity sector, and they were keen to do something with an existing agency that they had. So I joined them, and we basically created a new offer. It was like a mini agency, if you like, and we did great things there for a couple of years. Again, that was very focused on creative and more kind of focused again on direct mail. And then that kind of leads me to where I am now. So I joined CFP in 2017 when that other supplier formalised a partnership with CFP. CFP has been around for a long time, very well regarded, very much kind of family vibes, doing great things, and so it was the perfect opportunity to kind of springboard what they were already doing and then continue to grow the lottery products. So yeah, that's my kind of that's how I got into the sector.
It's interesting, really, because when you're talking about the 1 billion figure for FX, when I first started working in lotteries, I pretty much thought it was a small scale operation. And I think this year, societal lotteries surpassed £1 billion within the UK.
2024, it surpassed, yeah.
Yeah. And I just had no, it was almost a sector that sleeps amongst society.
100%.
People just have no acknowledgement on the amount of impact it can have for good causes and the charities that support it.
Yeah, absolutely great. I think what's also interesting there, Jim, is that number, that £1 billion, so only represents the income that's generated from society lotteries. So those lotteries that run on a license, any organisation that runs their gambling activity on a council registration, that income isn't included within those figures. So it's actually well above £1 billion. But point taken, it's this kind of very silent industry under the parapet that's doing great things. And again, kind of full circle, that conundrum I had about doing that work and seeing really no impact. Yes, I was earning a wage and those things, but had no real tangible impact. Over here, without it sounding a little cliche, if we get increased response rates on a campaign or a program over time and increase the amount of income, or launch a new program where there's then new income coming into a charity, that actually has tangible impacts that hits the front line, people who need it, animals who need it, services that are provided and delivered. And that's kind of cool. So yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. And so you've been in the industry, what, say 10 years?
Yeah, it's just over 10 years now.
Yeah. So what's the most significant change that you've seen in lotteries in that time?
I think there are a number of changes, to be frank, but I think for me, mainly it's the adoption and or the acceptance of lottery. So when I first joined, I remember having conversations with charities who very much looked down their nose at raffles and lottery on the basis that it produced supporters who weren't their type of supporters. They're just in it for the cash, they're just in it for the win, and they don't really care what we do. And therefore, they either aren't going to stick around or they don't have the right kind of atypical charity supporter behaviour. And if you roll forward kind of that period of time now, and you look back at those organisations, most, if not all of them, have some kind of gaming program. So there's been an acceptance there, because actually this type of giving is giving. It's not just about the cash. It's absolutely about impact. It's about choice, the way in which somebody chooses to support a charity rather than just taking cash. There are other products available in the market if you want big cash and big jackpots. These types of programs typically aren't them. So I think it's very much kind of that acceptance piece for sure. Again, as part of our work, we talk to trustees and various directors at charities, and there's a much better understanding of this type of giving now and the kind of gambling legislation. And again, I think that's broader term. Once, where gaming programs were very much separate fundraising entities or just entities within the overall individual giving mix, they are now integrated teams largely. I think there's still some work to be done on that, to be honest. But yeah, it's far less siloed, I'd say.
We'll go into opportunities that the industry can have over the next 5 years in a little bit, because I've got quite a few questions I want to ask you about that. But just beforehand, you were recently installed as the chair for the Lotteries Council. Can you just give me a little insight into the Lotteries Council, as well as what motivated you to put yourself forward for that position?
Yeah, definitely. The Lotteries Council is foremost is a trade body, so it exists for its members, and that's to champion change, provide benefits in terms of support and growth and legal and advice to various members. And those members can be charities themselves, and members can also be suppliers to the sector. So the council's got around 500 different members, so it's quite a sizable body. Um, and I think being part of the council for me was always about kind of investing the right time and trying to add value back into the sector via the most relevant trade body. So we're of course members of the IOF and members of the DMA and members of other bodies, but the Lotteries Council actually has a voice, and it has a voice to Parliament, into the regulatory sectors, and it has a voice to members. And it was always kind of actually we can properly add value in a good way via that as a vehicle. I think when I got involved, kind of beyond the member, I joined initially the Public Affairs Committee, and again that was a real eye opening as to just how much work goes on behind the scenes. Honestly, it's unreal. So there's approximately, I mean, at any one time, I guess anywhere between 7 and 10 different people on the Public Affairs Committee, all from different backgrounds, all from different companies or charity suppliers or charities, all giving their time as volunteers and all pushing out content and challenging government and writing papers and responding to consultations. So that was kind of amazing. And then I was invited to become a board director a couple of years later. And again, for me, it's about taking responsibility in terms of actually, I wanted to take on more responsibility in terms of what we could drive forward, agendas that could be set, content that we're pushing out, content that's being put out at conference, and kind of solidifying or making more official my role within the sectors. I guess it's as much as it initially was more about me and what we were doing, it then became more about kind of actually how can we make the sector stronger. And I think I'd always really fancied the idea of being chair on the basis that the chair is not an executive position. The chair is one of governance, really. So it's not about making swathing changes, but it's about being cognizant of changes that are upcoming, and ensuring that we have the right people together in order to help make that change, so that we are delivering to as a trade body to our members. And I think I've got a more natural focus on marketing and those types of conversations, and I think that's what I want to try and bring to the role to help organisations grow their programmes.
So how does the Lotteries Council work with the Gambling Commission to shape regulation that is fit for purpose?
Yeah, good question. So I think it actually starts with government, because ultimately the Gambling Commission's role is to regulate the law. And so if we're talking about lawmaking, policy change, that sits with government. That's a government ministerial process change, essentially. So the way in which the Lotteries Council, does that is it lobbies, it attends events, it creates events, it writes papers, it challenges ministers, it invites ministers to speak or to input on potential change. That bit is what I was referring to a moment ago in terms of the amount of work that the Public Affairs Committee at the Council do is incredible in terms of output, of course, but also just the volume of work. So it's very much almost an everyday thing, challenging government questions, as I say. And I'm sure we'll come on to some of those decisions that have been made. What the government then does is it sets that policy. Once it's agreed and it essentially passes through government, it will then be given to the Gambling Commission, and the Gambling Commission then sets it into law. So the Gambling Commission will invite all suppliers and or operators to consultations, for example. So there have been quite a considerable few over the last few years, and the GC wants to know, does it apply to your sector, yes or no, and why, and what are your responses to these typical scenarios? So again, the way in which the Lotteries Council would work there is direct dialogue with the Commission. It's not about being able to change, but it's about ensuring that we get our voice heard, but then working with members to make sure that their voices are heard. So making sure that our members are loaded with information, stats and facts that they can then themselves write a response to consultations, and then try and encourage members to submit responses, and then hopefully the Gambling Commission will take that on board. And in some cases they do, and then in some cases they don't. Sarah Gardner, who was who's from the Gambling Commission, was at the Lotteries Council conference a couple of weeks ago, and she made it very clear that the relationship between the GC and the Lotteries Council is very strong. And I've always seen that relationship be very strong. The GC is not there to penalise. I mean, they will if they have to, clearly, but their role is not about trying to find fault. It's about good, solid regulation, and that's always been very clear. So the Gambling Commission attend the council events, for example. When we have online sessions, the GC are invited, and they often turn up to those and give updates and things. So we've got a really strong partnership.
Yeah, I although I'm not a member of the Lotteries Council, I did attend the Lotteries Council event earlier this year. And one of the really important things to mention is that a lot of associations or councils can be accused of, just being a get together. But you could really, in the sessions at the conference, you could really see from the policy affairs group, I think is it headed up by Nick Cook, or was headed up by Nick Cook.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And just to understand the amount of work that they have to get through on the side to put people and operators within the industry in the best possible position is really, it's a commendable thing, really. And I found it just like really interesting. It's not only the thing that they encourage the Gambling Commission or the government to adopt, it's the things that they don't as well. So loads of things that they've could be detrimental to the industry. And I just thought it was a really, really interesting position from the Lotteries Council and also from the Policy Affairs Group.
Yeah, and it is so much more than just a get together. I mean, if you want to kind of geek out on lotteries and raffles and prize led incentivized giving, genuinely a great couple of days. And that takeaway says it all in terms of actually being able to take stuff away from those sessions. Is certainly great to hear.
So in your time working for the Lotteries Council, what's been the most significant policy victory that you've been part of?
So there are a number. I mean, so in the last year alone, there have been 11 different topics that have been flagged for essentially a response, consultation and otherwise. So it's a fairly constant thing. And I think last summer, there were some specific changes upcoming around direct marketing choices and potential impacts that were going to be imposed on charities and also potentially supporters, all of which, again, we responded to and got a successful outcome. I think they are positives and great steps forward in terms of protecting the sector and supporters. But I think arguably one of the largest, and of course the Lotteries Council cannot take full credit for this, but I do believe they played a huge role in it nonetheless, and that was the annual sales limit increase. So back in 2020, the annual sales limits were 10 million, and they were then changed to 50 million. And things like the per draw sales limit increased from 4 million to 5 million, the upper prize amount from 400k to 500k. And I think there was a degree, we were certainly pushing for more at that stage, but government and therefore the GC then regulating those decisions came up with that number. And I think there was a degree of levelling up at that level. That level was right at that time because we needed to keep up with being competitive, essentially. But also, you have to recognise that many organisations actually were having to run essentially multiple lotteries under multiple different licences, which was just a complete mess. All of the legislation and the reporting and the due diligence and the governance that had to go around that, really, which was essentially trying to loophole the situation where the government was tying one arm behind a charity's back because it was successful. It was running a great lottery, but they were having to operate in this way. So that kind of got rid of a lot of that overnight. And I think that has had a huge impact, just based on cost alone, let alone the kind of opening up of other organisations who are holding back from growing because they were nearly at the £10 million annual sales limit. They've now been able to push on with speed and grow the amount of impact that they can then deliver to their particular beneficiaries. So I would say that largely must be one of the greatest achievements.
And how many of your members are tipping over that 10 million threshold?
So there are, as a ratio, there are clearly far more. It's the kind of the Pareto 80-20, isn't it? Although it's probably not as many as 20%. But it's that kind of 80-20 balance where the majority of organ aren't at that or weren't at that 10 million limit at that time. But there are those organisations who were at that limit, and I guess it was more kind of focused on that type of activity, but also this whole kind of levelling up, around things like it's not just the annual income, it was also prize value as well. So yeah, far more at that limit, but could be, I guess, in the future.
There seems to be a lot of legacy elements when it comes to gambling and lotteries. I mean, one that springs to mind at the moment is there seems to be a battle between Allwyn, the Gambling Commission, and the People's Postcode Lottery when it comes to Northern Ireland. And as somebody who was, completely new to lotteries, I just didn't even flag up that the only lottery that you can play in Northern Ireland, that remit, is the Allwyn, is the national lottery, but they're trying to open it up at the moment, right?
Yes, they are. So there's a couple of different points to what you've just said there. So there's a group of charities within the UK who do operate lotteries in Northern Ireland, and that's okay. There are rules and regulations as to how you do that, how it's positioned, and the specific laws that then apply to those. But it is very much, and Ireland is the same. Laws essentially were created a very, very long time ago, and they are not, you used this term fit for purpose a moment ago. Those laws are not fit for purpose. And so there's, again, this process of kind of levelling up. And there's great gusto that's kind of happening now in terms of the changes that are kind of going through government and are likely, therefore, to be approved. If those changes are approved and it goes through, certainly from a Northern Ireland perspective, that activity should then sit under the Gambling Commission, Gambling Commission's remit in terms of policy making and law. There is a great opportunity there because, just like in Scotland, England, and Wales, in Northern Ireland, there are charities who are desperate to raise more income to serve their beneficiaries, and they are really just being, again, kind of prohibited from doing that. So hopefully, with those changes, it'll allow them to raise more money.
And what are your views on the state of the lottery market as it sits in the UK? Do you think there's still plenty of room for growth? Do you think it's nearly saturating? I mean, there's a couple of people talking about how many actual lotteries are taking place on a charity level. It's grown quite a bit, hasn't it?
It certainly has grown quite a bit. So if you look at income over time, that income growth looks at 17% compound annual growth rate, which is fairly significant in any market, let alone the charity sector. And if you look at kind of individual giving and regular giving and the rate at which that's growing, lottery really is kind of a rising star. So this term around saturation has been a conversation since I've joined the sector, and I think yes and no. There are arguments about are there too many charities, and what is the response to that? I don't know. Are there too many lotteries? I don't think so, because a lottery can be very, very specific and can be very, very very much focused on, and I'm using lottery as an interchangeable term for raffle and lottery, I guess. But it can be very much focused on a core set of supporters. Lottery, as in the more archetypal subscription-based, direct debit-based, typically is more of an acquisition tool. And I think if you look at acquisition and how successful that still operates to be, I don't get the argument for saturation just yet. Ultimately, when it comes down to 2 or 3 charities who are identical and they have identical lottery mechanics and their lottery proposition is exactly the same. Ultimately, the supporter has to make the choice, but they're still making the choice to join that new lottery. So I don't think we've reached saturation. There was a conversation around Facebook saturation as well, in terms of, I go online and I'm served charity ad after charity ad. That's the mechanic of how advertising works. You're getting served content based on what you've been searching. So no, I don't think it's saturated, and there are certainly new entrants into the market. I think one of the challenges is often spend, though, available spend. So how much is the organisation willing to invest? And I think what we have seen, and again, to kind of address this point about saturate, is what we have seen is organisations moving regular giving acquisition budget into lottery. So I'm guessing by that very notion, there's an element of, this is a product that's growing. It's giving us good returns that we can then do good work with. Let's invest in that. So I'm guessing those organisations are also not seeing it as a saturated product.
I'm probably guilty of always doing this saturation point. It's my risk averse nature, but it reminds me of early 90s newspaper headlines when Ian Wright was signing a new contract for Arsenal, and everyone's there going, he's getting paid £3,000 a week. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. You're like, comparison to the wages today is easily sustainable. And I think that's probably my viewpoint on saturation, when I always have to check myself to there going, there's plenty of opportunity for pockets of growth.
For sure. And on the whole sustainability thing, look at the proceeds that are falling out the back end of these programs. Significant amount of double-digit proceeds, net profit that's being generated. In some case, plus 90%. That's got to be some kind of sustainable way of giving, right?
Yeah. What do you think is the main driver behind the growth of lottery programs?
I think again, like all my responses, I seem to have 2 or 3 points to one question, but I think it would go back to that point I made earlier about gaming, lottery raffles sitting outside of fundraising. And in more recent years, it's come within fundraising. And so it's therefore got far more attention, far more interest by trustees and the board who want to grow this income stream. It produces sustainable results in terms of growth metrics, lifetime value, payback, ROI. So as that's grown, I think the interest has therefore grown, and the level of investment. I think what's also kind of key is that lotteries, just like giving, is an acceptable way to support charities. So there's a high degree of kind of general public awareness and perception of what a charity lottery is. It's not like it's a sneaky product, and it's not like it's like a dark art way of getting involved. It is what it is. Raffles have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, quite literally. And so this is just a kind of a modern take on it. And again, I think where organisations are then becoming more cognizant of that, they see this as a rising star product. It's allowing them to have a different conversation with supporters. So maybe supporters who lapsed, who are no longer regular givers, supporters who want to be engaged in a slightly different way, more relaxed, a different tone of voice, vibrant colours that sit slightly away from the brand guidelines and things. It just allows charities to have a slightly different approach and a slightly different conversation, and with their growth becomes more interest. So I think there's a number of things in there, but it comes down to this kind of just general thread of acceptance. It's a growing product, so let's do more of it.
Okay. And what emerging technologies do you think are the biggest drivers behind it? Is it online advertising? Is it mobile first? Is it new formats?
So I think emerging technologies, I would say more so, it's one of two things. It's age protection and age verification, which is absolutely key to it's kind of fundamental to success and the future of our industry. That whole piece around protection of gamblers and supporters. But there are new methods, and again, this process of levelling up, number of operators who are still running completely legal methods of age verification, but it's a bit dated. And so there's a number of new tech offers that are coming to address that. Just as a direct response to your question, that's the one that kind of comes front of mind. But then away from that, yes, digital is pretty huge. So if you look at, you were talking about billion pound industry earlier. And since 2017, there was a divergence between remote sales and non-remote sales. So remote being what the Gambling Commission calls internet sales and telephone. So there's been like the graph goes like that for remote, whilst non-remote kind of carries on. So the whole world of digital scoops up a number of different things. So that's of course mobile first. That's digital advertising. Is different ways of different mechanics of advertising. So things like value exchange coming firmly back on the table again. They kind of died a death about 5 or 6 years ago, but they're back and they use Meta and they use telephone. But it's also, I think, it's about the experience and the flexibility to create different experiences. So there are programs, for example, that offer incentive draws, free entries to join, to incentivize players to get involved. And so it's less about kind of square peg, square hole now. I think operators on both sides, kind of ELM and also charity side, are also keen to progress. Look at what supporters want. Why did you cancel? Get feedback as to why that was. Shape a solution for it. And I think that's kind of, as I say, scooped up within the digital vertical. But there's certainly a lot of stuff going on.
Excellent. And one subject that I really wanted to touch on that was a topic of conversation at the Lotteries Council conference is this element of prize draws and how it is currently falling outside of regulation due to the free entry route for participation. Where do you sit? I think I'll ask you, for clarity's sake, I'll ask you with your Lotteries Council hat on, where you sit just in terms of these big, prize draws that everyone sees.
Yeah, and my point of clarity there would be that we are talking about commercial prize draws, not your traditional DM-based prize draw that have been around potentially longer than paper-based raffles. Which is still a very significant and sustainable way to connect to supporters. But when you're talking about commercial prize draws, I'll name drop the most obvious, which is someone like Amaze. When you side by side what the Amaze activity, whether it's right or wrong, when you side by side what they do versus what lottery operators have to adhere to, it's not a level playing field. And so what we ask for and what we're asking the government for is fairer regulation. So, like, what is fairer regulation? Why is one party allowed to accept credit cards whilst lottery operators aren't allowed to accept credit cards, for example? We don't want to diminish all of the good stuff that's already come before. So we're not asking to suddenly start allowing credit cards, of course. And there are limits in place and there are protections in place for good reason. So, it's kind of, what does that fairer regulation look like? Should they be regulated or should we be deregulated? I think is another question. But the whole premise of those two pieces of activity are very different. I think there's room for products like Amaze. If you look at their success and their growth, great prizes, bundling of tickets, cars, houses, lots of that's all good. And for the playing population of the UK who aren't potentially going to give to charity, that's totally relevant. And there are hundreds, quite literally hundreds, of these commercial prize draws that also sit outside of Amaze, which also offer prizes. But again, when you look at the detail around some of the smaller commercial prize draws, there's some real questions I think that need to be asked about their approach, the background to the people that are running those organisations. Again, if you're a lottery operator, if you get it wrong, you go to jail or you get fined. And so again, it's not a level playing field. So there's some regulation stuff in there, and then I guess what's not fair, but it is what it is the kind of the ability to spend on acquisition. And it was publicly reported that one particular commercial prize draw outfit was spending over £1 million a month at one point, and that might still be the case, and it may now be higher. Lottery operators cannot spend that at that level, and that's not about, that's because they're a charity and therefore you can't make an argument over availability of budget. What we can argue about is things like the ratio, 80-20 ratio, which does prevent or preclude some organisations from growing, because you have to balance the amount of proceeds that are going back to back to the organisation. But when you're in an investment phase, that can be quite challenging. And of course, there are ways of managing that. But again, it's not apples for apples, and we're not calling for the demolishment of those commercial prize draws, but there has to be a more level playing field, would be my brief response to that question.
It's an excellent response. And it also alludes to an element that I really like what you said about us being deregulated, because when you look at the element of credit cards, it was clearly introduced for big sports betting and gambling operators to protect players or people who could potentially have gambling harms. Whilst we've got limits and caps on the amount of plays that people can do, and we're a pretty low threshold for gambling harm, I do understand the reason why we adhere to the credit card, even though if they were to get rid of credit cards, I don't think it'd have much impact on the lottery operators that are in the market at the moment.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think credit cards have always been a fairly small percentage, and we can still officially accept credit cards for non-remote channels. I think my point is around behaviour, and kind of the charitable sector is always held in a much higher regard than commercial. I think if you're allowing people to engage on a gambling product with borrowed money, which is what a credit card is, I don't think that sets the right behaviour, and it would petrify me to see that us kind of row back on those elements, because it's not just about sales and player growth. It's about sustainability, doing the right thing, and helping society. And I think I guess we'll always have a point of difference, us versus a commercial organisation. There's always going to be a point of difference there, because we have to be held in a higher regard, and we have to do the right thing.
But the other thing as well is what you were saying there, being held to regard or being held to account. And if you're not sticking to the rules, if you're regulated, you want to stick to the rules. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, it's kind of imperative if you don't want to go anywhere for a period of time or pay a lot.
Yeah. So quick question now before we wrap up, and this is with your Navigator hat on, obviously, because you were specialising in lottery player acquisition, but it's acquisition that is of interest to me, but also engagement and retention. I just really wanted to get your insight into that. Personally, I've really struggled with player acquisition in terms of online, but then again, the cost of acquisition is getting so high. I'd be really interested to know, your views on what's happening in terms of engagement and retention of players.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll just start a little bit on the acquisition front. I think cost per acquisition, which is broadly the most common measure for the success of a campaign, we've always said if you're focusing on CPA, the horse is already bolted, because that is how much did we spend, how many players did we get? There's about 1 million different KPIs that you could measure before that. If you look at CPAs, yes, broadly speaking, they are increasing, but there are still organisations that are generating players for £10 or £20 per player, which is significantly lower than the kind of what is acceptable from a CPA right now. And there's a reason they're doing that, and it's because they're focused more, I think, on the creative piece. I think where Navigator came from was this requirement to take responsibility for the end-to-end. So without this sounding overly like a pitch, I think one of the issues we see is if it's engagement, if it's retention, if it's acquisition, if it's management, there's often 3 to 5 different suppliers in that mix. And the agency who's, for example, running the digital acquisition is saying, well, it's your supplier's website. That's wrong. We're putting loads of people on there, but they're not converting, and the suppliers also then pointing the finger back at the agency saying you're not putting the right people on there. And so that responsibility piece, I think if there's more responsibility and more oversight of the various KPIs, you can take control, and you can then see CPAs come down. One of the examples we give to this is a process that an organisation went on to reduce CPA from 120 pounds per player down to sub £30 per player. So it can work. Engagement, I think there's two, and retention, I think there's a number of different kind of trains of thought on this. Quite often there is no stewardship, or there's no engagement post sign up, which is criminal. If someone is doing something with you for you, you should be saying thank you to them, and they should be kept involved. I think there's also then the balance of them being too involved. So some organisations will drop players straight into their wider regular giving stewardship flows, which includes postal, TM, and email. The problem with that is quite often lottery is about arm's length giving. So I don't, as a lottery player, I don't want to be bombarded with this heavy messaging stuff. It's my choice. I want to be arm's length from you. I really appreciate and love what you do, but I'm happy just being a couple of steps back. And so I think, again, like without sounding too cliche, you need to write a stewardship program that fits the profile of your players. I think when you look at the data, if you have 5 or 6 different channels of acquisition and you zero the data all time, every single month, back to zero, you'll see the common cancellation spike, which is in between months 3 and 4. So my question would be, are you serving any kind of comms in between months 3 and 4? Why did they sign up? What message did they sign up to? And are you reaffirming that message at month 3 and 4? But interestingly, if you look at month 11, 22, 36, 47, also, so all the zeros, once all the data is zeroed, there are also very common spikes throughout a 60-month period. And I would argue, are you doing anything around those? Because I bet you're not. I bet by then the supporter is either in an RG, just a regular RG stewardship flow, and not in a lottery flow. So yeah, I think there's an incredible amount of work that needs to be done on retention.
Just on that milestone, the way we measure it, the company that I'm at the moment, we don't actually see a fall in the 3-month window that everyone commonly cites. I think we just measure it. I mean, you can just see a steady decline, and then it sort of flattens out after 12 months.
Yeah.
On that little blip that you're seeing, every 12, 24, 36, are you seeing, would that be more seasonal? Because we definitely see something in January. January is just, I get back from Christmas and I'm like, okay, here we go. This is where the cancellations are going to drop in.
But how is your December for cancellations though?
So that was not as high. Yeah, because December's a generous time, right?
And I think when you look at, again, we've looked at data on this before, December is usually one of the better months in the year for retention. And so I think there's some degree of Christmas and January effect where January looks worse than it potentially is. November and December are also typically times when organisations don't recruit because anecdotally the cost to recruit, certainly digitally, is higher at that time of year. But when you look at the recruits that come in at that time of year, they stick around for longer and they have a much higher lifetime value. So again, there's some data, and of course, it's very much organisation specific and the specific journey that you've got. And yes, there may be seasonality within those later kind of 2, 3, 4, 5-month blips. And I guess the clear point is to go and have a look at that data, because it's not just like it's 1 or 2 channels or the same channel blipping. It's all of the channels. They seem to blip at the same time. And so there's, being inquisitive, a champion going in and finding that.
Okay, one final question before we wrap up. In terms of the sector as a whole, what's the one thing that you'd like to see happen in the next 12 months?
I think I can't just have one thing, so I'm going to split that down into two things, if that's okay.
Okay.
But I'll keep it quick. It's got to be some degree of movement forward on the commercial prize draws, in terms of the levelling of the playing field that I was referring to before. And it again, like we keep on seeing a degree of movement forward. There's statements being issued by the DCMS fairly recently on that is still on the government's agenda, and we want to see action and we want to see a response. So in the next 12 months, I would really hope that we see that. The second part to that, it's kind of related. It's to the protection of players, and I think it's absolutely awesome that this is very much on the agenda right now. And the Lotteries Council conference that we had a couple of weeks ago was focused on playing it safe, and we had SG Global there, for example, who were talking about their training package, and they had lived experience. And it's awesome. I think the point I was making earlier about new tech that's coming in, there's more tech coming in around the protection of supporters, and that protection starts with organisations understanding how they create policy and how they live and breathe those policies. So I think seeing that advance in the next 12 months would be really cool. And you didn't ask for it, but in terms of where we're going, I would hope over the next 3 to 5 years that we continue being a sustainable income source, one that is attractive and exciting and very much in growth mode. And long may that continue.
Yeah, great answer. And listen, I do have to say, we were in the same session for that SG Global with the lived experience person, and it just roots you to your seat when you hear their stories and the responsibility that we have as operators, as people that work in this industry, to always put players first and protect them and minimize gambling harm. Because I found it such an emotive session that they held on that day.
Absolutely. I mean, there's evidence that shows that this type of gambling that we're involved in is the lowest form of harm. We know that. Can't rest on your laurels about that point. And the protection of consumers, the protection of vulnerable people, the protection of underage players and things, that's not a tick box exercise. It's not just a policy that you have on your website. You have to live and breathe that. That's another point that was made by Woods Were during the conference. If you have a policy, it has to be living and breathing. I think that lived experience thing, I've never experienced that myself in terms of having firsthand how somebody's been impacted by problem gambling. And I would massively advocate any operator who hasn't been through that process to get involved. Shameless plug for the Lotteries Council. We are rolling out some training around that very topic, both the protection of vulnerable and underage players, and also training on the LCCP, the handbook, the law, in terms of how operators can make those policies more living and breathing. So there's some more to come on those 2 points soon.
Okay, brilliant. So what I'll do is in the show notes of this episode, I'll get the links for all of those points on the Lotteries Council's initiatives that I could drop in for people to find out more. On a personal or commercial level, where's the best place to contact you?
So LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to contact me. So reach out on there, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So if you want to debate something, challenge something, agree, then please get in contact.
Brilliant. And I'll put your profile link in the show notes as well then. George, that just leaves me to say thank you very much for your time today. It's been a really informative session. I could have gone down, when you were answering questions, I could have gone down so many different avenues, whether that's digital, whether it's the Lotteries Council stuff, or just the general lottery sector. I'd probably love to have you on again at some point in the future. I've really enjoyed speaking with you today, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, so that's all for this episode. Please tune in for the next one. See you soon.